HTTP mocking with WireMock, and I'm Handstand Sam Online. So why would you even want to mock HTTP? Speed, because you have latency that's inherent with HTTP. You want to avoid rate limits. Sometimes you can only call an API like 5 times within a minute or something of that regard, and so if you use a mock server, you don't have to worry about those restrictions. Modification of state. If you have like something like a bank account that you keep adding $10 to, sometimes you don't want to have to go reset that state, so mocking allows you to do that. Edge cases. So in cases like if you receive errors or really hard to replicate scenarios, mocking HTTP is really nice for that. I already talked about error scenarios, yeah, but like if you go to 409 or 500 and you need to test those scenarios, that's really awesome. And it's deterministic. So your servers in general that you talk to are going to return back a large permutations of things depending on how they're set up and how they're running. But if you use a mock, then you know you're going to get back what you know you're going to get back. So this is great for testing and test-driven development, whether that be manual or whether that be automated. So we know why we want to mock HTTP, but what are we going to mock and where are we going to mock it? So right now I'm an Android developer. I work at Capital One. But in past lives, I've been server developer, front-end developer for web, and kind of all over the place. And the one thing that's like key about all these things is they all involve HTTP, and a lot of them with REST and JSON, but just HTTP in general. So as a client, whether it be mobile or web or whatever, we all talk to an HTTP service that we rely on. And if we use WireMock, we can go ahead and use that in place of our current service and mock out all those APIs so that we can get rid of all those problems that we talked about. If you are a server developer and you're programming in any language, you also probably rely on other backend services that you have, whether that be like a wrapper on a database service or something else internal. And so you probably want to do mocking as well. So if you're just on that server layer, you can still use WireMock to mock out any dependencies, because as this is all like kind of sort of service-oriented architecture, we're all relying on some other service, and being able to mock that out is powerful. And finally, to third-party services. So I talked about rate limiting, but things like maybe Google Maps or the GitHub API or anything that you have to pay for, like per call, it's really nice to be able to mock those out because you can save on cost and things there. So we talked a little bit about why you want to mock and where you do want to mock, but now I'm going to talk specifically about WireMock. And I put this picture up here because this is really what WireMock is. It's a Swiss Army knife. You can use it for so many things, and it's very, very powerful. So WireMock itself is an open source library. It's Apache 2.0, and it was started by Tom Akehurst in 2011. So this has been around a long time. I'm not selling you anything. I have contributed a little bit to this project, so I have some investment in it, but yeah, it's just a really great library. So as developer to developer, if you're using HTTP, this is awesome, and you'll see why. So now it's all live demos. So maybe that was a lot faster than I said of slides, so here we go. So running WireMock. First thing is, WireMock can be run in 2 ways. One is via the command line. You can just say java-jar, which is the ability to start a Java jar file. And you say, just go ahead and start my WireMock jar. And that will go ahead and boot it up. The other way is if you're writing Java code, you can programmatically start that up, and I'll show that later on. But I wanted this to be a talk that anybody in any language, whether you're writing Ruby or Go or Python or whatever you're using, you can use WireMock, and we'll be using straight curl to show you that you can make your HTTP subbing from anywhere. So yeah, these slides are available, and I'm going to be doing a lot of copying and pasting, so feel free to copy and paste later on, but for now, just kind of watch because it's going to go pretty fast. If you click on this link, you can download the WireMock, the standalone version as I talked about. So we can just take this java-jar, WireMock standalone, and I've already pre-downloaded it. So just go ahead and run it. And as you see, WireMock is started up. So it runs on port 8080 by default, and it's good to go. So let's check it out. If I just went to localhost 8080, I'm going to get, well, this is a problem I was seeing earlier. So I have to open incognito windows, and that's because of browser caching. So I'll be doing that a little bit in here. Localhost 8080. So if I go ahead and hit that, I get a 403. What WireMock does, though, is it has this admin API endpoint that you use to programmatically set up all of your stubs. So if I go underscore admin, which is probably the most kind of random address, that's where they put everything under. So if you use this endpoint, it'll show you all the mappings that WireMock currently has. So mappings are essentially rules. where you say, if this is the input that I'm getting for the server, this is what I should return. So we'll be doing a lot with the mappings here. But this admin endpoint, there's basically some endpoints beyond that, like /mappings or /settings, that we'll be hitting via REST calls. So what you can also, so I just showed you the admin endpoint. If you don't want to run on port 8080, you can specify the port, or you can actually specify an HTTPS port. So you can run WireMock on HTTPS. So did that here, then I just say HTTPS port, and I could say like 8443. And then if I did that in here, HTTPS 8443, I get the same thing, right? So I'm running my WireMock server, but it's on HTTPS. And you might be saying, well, the certificate isn't valid, it's not secure, but that's okay. You can specify your own, and there's commands to do that, but I just kind of wanted to show you that HTTPS was possible. All right, so let's keep going. So we figured out how we can start WireMock and run it. Also, so you can do this on a server hosted somewhere. You can run this locally. That's what I'm doing during this demo. Tom Akers has a side project. It's called Mock Lab, and if you go to wiremock.org, it'll pop up saying, "Are you interested?" But he has a third-party hosted service for this too. So if you wanted to run a WireMock instance and not worry about managing it, you could do that. So now let's talk about, we've got this WireMock server running. We see that there's no mappings there. So let's talk about proxying traffic through WireMock, recording that traffic, and then playing that back. Because obviously recording is kind of the easiest way to get started with mocking. So there's a command that you can run on the standalone version when you start WireMock via the command line. It just says proxy all. And if you say this, the URL that you specify after that, all the traffic that you hit to WireMock will forward onto there. So all of your payload, headers, everything, and it will come back. So let's give that a shot, and we're going to proxy to wiremock.org. So I'm once again going to do a new incognito window. We'll go over here. We'll stop WireMock. And then this time we'll run it with the, I think I have it in the clipboard. So we're going to do WireMock standalone, proxy all to wiremock.org, and I start it up. So this time it's running on port 8080 again, and it says I'm going to proxy all traffic to wiremock.org. So you saw before when I went ahead and made a request to localhost 8080, it went ahead and returned back nothing. But if I go ahead and make that request now, all of my traffic that's going to my local host is now completely proxied out to wiremock.org because that's what I specified, and come back. So if you want to learn more about Mock Lab, his thing, you could do that. And it thinks that because I'm in an incognito window, and it's the first time I visited the website. But this is cool. Now I can go ahead and explore around the website. And as you see, it's still localhost. I'm still going straight through this WireMock instance. All right, so let's see what else we got. So that's proxy all. Next thing I want to talk about is verbose. So if you looked right now, you can't really tell, is this traffic going through WireMock? Do you believe me? Is this actually happening? So if we add on --verbose to this, -verbose, then let's go ahead and make that request again to one of these things. And you'll start seeing all sorts of junk coming through here that nobody wanted. Now, some of this is binary data, so this might be an image, or some of it might be gzipped responses. That's just the way it shows up in here. But if you save these to a mapping file, like we'll see in a second, then it doesn't look like garbage. So I'm going to go ahead and kill that because I don't like verbose mode. But let's do the next command, which is recording. So we talked about proxying, we talked about verbose, but now if we want to record mappings, what this is going to allow us to do is, as these diagrams show, you have your client, you want to eventually connect to wiremock.org, and we've already run our WireMock server here as well. So what I want to do now is I want WireMock to capture all that traffic and write it to local files as mappings. So the way to do that is I start WireMock with this -- record mappings. I'm going to go ahead and do that. Oops. So sorry, the terminal gets a little crazy, but at the end, we're starting WireMock with proxy all and record mappings. And before I do that, actually, I want to show you. I have this demo folder, and in it, that's where I'm running the terminal out of. It's just a standalone jar. But if I go ahead and run this command, I'll have those two directories created. There's files and mappings, and I'll show you kind of how that gets filled up. But as you can see, nothing's in there now. We'll do a new incognito window because of Chrome's beautiful caching. And we'll start it up. So there's the web page again. And if I go over here, now I have all sorts of delicious files available. So I've got, let's expand this out a little bit. In files, you see I have the PNG files, JavaScript files, everything else that was requested through this proxy. So automatically I recorded all the assets that have been received back. And that's really awesome. If I looked here in root, this is actually the HTML response that was received. And then, let's see here. So the next thing is, if these are files, so this is the actual content that's returned, but how does WireMock know what it should return back? The way it knows is via mappings. So we talk later on about stubbing, but when you stub, you're basically saying, WireMock, I want you, when you call this, return back this. And so each one of these mappings is the result of you stubbing, and it did it for us. So let's look at that main root mapping here. So we look in here, and we see that it is a mapping that says when we request the URL of just the base endpoint, and it's a get method, we'll return a response of the status 200 and the body file of the content here. So we already showed you that. It's an HTML file, which is as text, but it'll go ahead and get returned along with all these other headers. So that's the response. Let's keep going. So you see, like that, it's really cool, right? So we only went through one page, but now we have all these files and mappings like already recorded for us. And if I continue on with this, I can close this out, and I can go ahead and say, let's look at docs. Let's look at the configuration. And I think my screen got a little, there we go. So all this is still happening through our WireMock instance, right? And now here goes the fancy part, so you actually believe me. I'm going to go ahead and just run WireMock by itself now. I'm going to turn off all the proxy. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to kill my Wi-Fi. Hopefully there's nothing I'm relying on with Wi-Fi. But there we go. So Wi-Fi is off. I'm going to go ahead and start the new incognito window again, just if you believe. There we go. Nothing's running at all, right? So I'm going to boot up WireMock. Go to any other website, it's not going to be there. So to start up WireMock, and if I went to that endpoint now that I talked about for mappings, let's see, you're going to see all sorts of beautiful stuff. So this is all of the mappings that were loaded in from those files, and I won't go into each one. But the last one here is that the first one it received, which was the HTML request. But every single one of those is one of those mappings, and WireMock is now programmed. When one of these requests is received, it'll return back that content. But if I'm here on the main page and I go ahead and click on docs, we've already gone there before, it's going to work. We already clicked on configuration, that's going to work. But I click on anything else, and I don't have stubs for it, because I didn't record that, right? So this is really cool. Like this is an example of a web page because it was really easy to show visually. But anytime you're running your APIs, like that you're running through, this is get requests, post requests, everything like that, it is automatically recorded. And while this is beautiful, there are caveats to it. As you saw the mappings, there's a bunch of like kind of random headers and things that you really don't care about. So you might have to go and strip those out or modify things, but it's a really great place to start. Like we already have a mock server, right? So I'm gonna turn the Wi-Fi back on so that this doesn't go awry. And we'll continue on. So I jumped a little bit into playback, but all I did was I restarted WireMock without the proxy and recording on, and it played back traffic, right? So what we did is we had the internet completely off. And so we were getting WireMock, was serving everything from the files and mappings and returned back. So we magically had our own local version of WireMock.org. Now let's talk about manipulation. So I have these mappings, so now I can do whatever I want, right? So let's go ahead and I'm going to make sure WireMock's dead. And then I'm going to go into these mappings files. So we know that this root HTML file is going to be the one that's returned because it's the main page. So let's just say like DevFest DC, save it, and then let's go ahead and boot WireMock again, because when you start WireMock, it reads out of those files and mappings and loads them into memory, right? So that's why I'm having to restart it. And then if I go here, and I'm going to go to the home page, but once again, I'll start a new incognito. There we go, and DevFest DC. So now we've modified these local mappings. We can modify this content and just stop right there and think, right? So let's say you have a mobile app, you're testing it, and you're going, or any app, you're going through WireMock, and then you're like, okay, I just captured this flow, but I want to change this one thing, so the content's slightly different, or that the response code's slightly different, and you can go ahead and do that with WireMock, right? So immediately, we've just had this new scenario that would take a long time for a server to replicate. If I said, you know what, make sure you return a 500 server team, it's probably going to take a few hours and mess up everybody else. So we can manipulate those files. And as I showed a little bit earlier, you can view the mappings, right? So all those got loaded into memory, and they're all at that admin endpoint. So there they are. Onward. Okay, we've talked about recording, we've talked about proxying, we talked about why. Now I want to talk about how every single one of you in this room that uses HTTP can use this. Because it is not just for Java, it's not just for anything. as you saw, there's a REST API that we're kind of viewing all the mappings for, but I can add mappings via the REST API as well. So let's do it. And as I said, if this is really small, I'm not sure what else to do with it. But I do have the slides you can follow along. If you go to twitter.com/handstandsam, it's there. And then you can just believe me also. So this is a post request I'm going to make. It's a curl. Hopefully everybody's familiar with curl, but it's basically the de facto way to make a HTTP request via the command line. And that's what I'll be using here. So I'm making a post request with the request body of this right here. So like the request body that's sent, and then I'm making that to my localhost server to the admin endpoint under mappings. So I'm basically making this REST post request to the mappings endpoint saying I want to set up this mapping. So what this mapping looks like is when you make a GET request to the URL hello, I want you to return a response 200 code with the contents hello world, and I want a header to be text plain. Let's give it a shot. WireMock is running. We're going to validate there's no mappings right now. There are mappings. Oh, this is the cache version, right? Let's see. Oh, okay, yeah. So if you have these files in mappings, they'll automatically get loaded in, right? And that's not what I want to do right now. So let's delete those out because we did that example. We'll reboot WireMock. And then if we check that endpoint, we'll have no mappings. Right. Okay. So yeah, I want to go ahead and make this stub now. So I've got WireMock running in this one terminal. I have another terminal window open where I'm going to do all these stubs, right? So I just hit paste. It made the curl request. And it's verbose. There's a lot of stuff going on, but basically it made that post request exactly like I said, and WireMock's caught it. So I'm going to go to the admin endpoint now and prove to you it's there. Here's my mapping that's set up in WireMock. So I've got when you hit hello and it's a GET, then return this. So let's do it. I'll put in hello. There it is. We now have a new mock. So that was all done programmatically, right? Like pretty easy. You could write a shell file that had a bunch of this stuff. I prefer to do it in code, and you guys can do it in code. But super easy to do it over REST API. So this can be completely remote. You can say reset the server, stub this up, and it's very, very powerful. All right, next. So that's a string response body. What about JSON? We all use JSON, right? Because REST APIs and JSON are the way to go, at least for now. So you can, instead of saying body where this was here, I can say JSON body. I'm sorry if that's so small, guys. But yeah, you can say JSON body instead. Actually, I might be able to adjust my screen size. I think I tried to do 720. That's no better. Okay, so you have JSON body, and in this case, I have like a JSON object with one field numbers, and it's an array. It just says 1, 2, 3. And so I wanted to have a header coming back of application JSON, and when I hit a GET to the JSON endpoint, I want it to come back. So once again, thankfully they've done all this pre-work. Copy paste, it's set up. So I'm going to go to WireMock, and now I have two stubs. This one is for JSON for a GET. So let's do that. We'll do to JSON, and there's our JSON data. So what's nice about this is a lot of us do work with JSON and is a REST endpoint using JSON. So instead of having to do all this crazy like kind of string escaping where you have to do the backward or forward slash quotes, we were able to just put it in as a normal format, and WireMock did that for us. So that's a little bit easier if you're dealing with JSON. Next thing would be a binary response. So not only do we want to support like JSON and text, we also want to support binary. So this might be an image, it might be any asset that you have that isn't text. So this one is a GET to the binary URL, and it's going to return the base64 body. They decided to use base64 body because it's a lot more compact than other binary formats. Let's go ahead and throw this up, paste. We'll go to binary this time, and that binary base64 decodes to yes indeed. So there's our content. So we've done stubbing then with binary, JSON, and strings. And let's keep going. So that's all. So far we've done a lot of like simple stubbing per se, because it's all just a GET request to a certain URL. But let's do some more complex stuff, because WireMock has, like I said, it's a Swiss Army knife. We can do all sorts of things. So first of all, you might have been seeing that we use GET, but you can use any HTTP verb that you want there to match. The special one is any. So in WireMock, if you say any, it can be any, like a post, a put, a GET, it doesn't matter, and WireMock will use that mapping. So you can use any of those. If you want to stub based on a URL pattern, so a lot of the times if you're doing stubbing, you want to say like, in this case, I have, if you do your URL slash some username slash profile, I want that to return back a user profile. Because in this case, like I don't care which user profile I hit, but if it hits the profile endpoint or that like pattern, I want it to return a certain value. So if it's doing that, I'm going to return back user profile goes here. So let's throw that in, stubbed up, and let's look at our mappings. So there it is. When we hit the regular expression for the pattern of profile, then we'll return this. So if I do sam/profile, user profile goes here. And I can do this with anybody, Bob, and so forth. And then if I don't have that be a match, then it's not going to give us anything. So WireMock specifically looking for that exact regular expression to return back the content. So that's URL pattern. What about query parameters? Because you have to stub something out. If the query parameter says, I want to search for this specific keyword, I want to return back a mock specifically for that, right? So in this case, this is going to be a stub for a URL path called query, and there's one query parameter, q equals WireMock. So if I do that, I'm going to return back this inline HTML response. Stub that up, come over here and look at the admin endpoint. This is a little bit bigger for you guys, I think too. But yeah, if I go ahead and go to query, and the query parameter q equals WireMock, then we'll return this HTML request or response. So let's do query and q equals, I'll do WireMock2, and we get a 404. So it has to exactly be that, and that's awesome because then you can very precisely set up the stub so that it's only going to match on that one query endpoint. Let's keep going. Swiss Army knife. Header matching. How many people have different versions of their API? Version 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So if you want to support 2 versions simultaneously, you might want to support version 2 and version 3 of your API. So WireMock, you can do that. In this case, it's going to be /endpoint, and if it contains the header of application JSON v2, then I want to return back version 2. So let's check it out, stub it up, and then here is my miss. So in this case, I'm going to request a curl with the header of application JSON v1, and we'll get a miss. And because this is using a header, I'm going to have to do it over curl. So, but there it goes. I got an HTTP error. It was not found. But now if I go ahead and use the matching one, it's going to use application JSON v2. We can do that, and there we go. We got version 2 response back. So it's going to match on headers. You have the ability to match on query parameters, on the URL pattern itself, all sorts of fun stuff. Request body, getting more complex. So the request body that you're sending in, you can do matching on that, right? So I want to make sure in this case that it contains the word Orioles. So I don't care where it is in there. There's a lot of different strategies that you can use, but contains one of them. You could have equal to. There's also a lot of really complex ones that Tom has put in there. But in this case, if it is a World Series and it contains Orioles, it says the Orioles win the 2017 World Series. I grew up here before the Nationals were around, so I'm still an Orioles fan, but Nats are good too. So. Let's clear that out and stub it up. So when we go to World Series now and make a post, we should see that, and it contains Orioles, we should see that they won the World Series. So here's my next one. I'm making a curl request with a JSON body saying the team is Orioles, the score was 10, and let's see what happens. There it is. The Orioles won the 2017 World Series. Hooray. Everybody in Baltimore is happy. All right, so we talked about that. And that was used in a JSON example there, but it could be any text that you're sending in as a request body. But a lot of us use JSON because that is kind of the way that we pass around structured data on REST APIs. So this is super cool. There's a thing called equal to JSON. And so if we use that instead of just contains, we can say that the JSON is actually going to match. So in this case, I'm making a very similar request, this time to an endpoint called score. And if the score has 10, and so yeah, if the body comes in with a score of 10 and the team Orioles, then we say the Orioles won the 2018 World Series. So let's go ahead and stub that out. I'm just going to show you too that these things are coming along, right? So there's our score, and if it's a equal to JSON, score of 10, team Orioles, then let's make our requests. I got 3 versions here. First one is a data where team, the first value would be team is Orioles, the second one is score 10. Let's go ahead and make that. Orioles won the World Series. Great. Let's make the second one. This time, what's different is, before I said the team was Orioles and the score is 10. This time I'm saying the score was 10 and the team is Orioles. This doesn't seem like too complex, right? But there, we got a response back. But what's important here is JSON can come in any order, right? So I might have two properties like that, score and team, but a lot of times they come in different orders. And at the end of the day, from the client perspective, like you don't care, you go ahead and parse that into your own object model. But if you're doing your request mapping in here, then you can actually match on a JSON data itself and not the order of it. So that's really powerful in WireMock and something I haven't seen elsewhere. And then lastly, I say if the Red Sox come in with a score of 1, guess what's going to happen? Oh, 404. Sorry, Red Sox. I like the Red Sox too, but anyway. I had heard of somebody. It should have been the Yankees. Anyway. Okay, so we talked about body. But as you see right now, like we got this kind of weird 404 Jetty can't find anything because WireMock is written on Jetty. If I do something really random here, I get this 404. But what if I want like a global error handler, right? What if I don't hit any of my stuff? I want to return back something intelligible because my app is looking for that. So maybe your server has like a 503 that's always going to come back, and it has some specific content. So in this case, I'm going to say at priority 10, and I haven't really gone over priorities, but WireMock has this concept of priority. So a mapping can be, by default, priority 5. The most important is priority 1, and the lowest is priority 10. So because this is a catch-all for anything that was not matched anywhere else, it's priority 10. I'm saying the method is any because I don't care if it's get, post, whatever. And the URL pattern is anything. And I'm going to return a 404 with a JSON error. So let's stub that up. There it is. And now I can make my request again, and I actually get something intelligible as my error response. So you can set these up different priorities, and this is like a catch-all in this case. All right. So as we make all these stubbing requests via curl, you notice that there's this ID coming back. And this is just a GUID that WireMock is generating, but it's in its in-memory model that it's using to store all these mocks, it's actually keeping those in a table. So what that allows you to do is to reference that later on and to actually edit or to delete those mappings. So if you want to edit, you just make another request to a mapping, and this time you go ahead and specify the mapping ID on that endpoint. And the same for deleting, you specify that. I'm not going to show that because I'd have to copy and paste what those IDs were, and I don't want to deal with that now. But super cool. And I just found this earlier this week. I talked to Tom about it, like, why don't we have a web UI for this? Like, that admin endpoint's kind of cool, but it's not super pretty. So this one guy, I forget his name now, but he's on Twitter, and I'll mention him. His plugin is actually down here at the bottom if you click on the link. But it's just a Chrome plugin. You can open up, and you can then visually go ahead and set up mappings. So I'm not going to do that myself, but there's another feature in here where you can view mappings. And because this is pointed by default to localhost 8080, I can see all of my mappings here. Now, in this configuration, you can actually set it up so you can point to any server. So this can be running on some cloud service, a different port, or whatever. You can still use this plugin to view those mappings. So check it out. It's definitely pretty nice to see it in a more visual way. So I get this beautiful thing, and I can click into each one and see what's going on versus that lovely, lovely view of all this junk. So very cool tool. So now we have all these mappings in WireMock. How do we go ahead and reset that, right? A lot of the times if you're doing tests or you are doing different mock accounts that you want to run through, you want to stub everything in WireMock, but you don't want to have to go shut down the server and restart it. And this is the beauty of using WireMock programmatically and not via the file mappings. So what you can do is send this admin/reset command, and it'll reset all the mappings. So we just looked, there was all this junk. If I go ahead now and make a request, a post request to admin/reset, do that, and boom. And I go back to my mappings, bada bing, bada boom. All right, so I got it reset. Cool, so we've talked about a lot of cool stubbing now. There's all different ways of matching, and it's very, very powerful. But let's talk about other cool things that WireMock can do, which are more advanced, like simulating errors and latency. So you guys have probably had real-world experience of hitting things like empty responses, malformed data, or like random data coming in and the connection getting closed. And these are all scenarios that you want to test for to make sure that your application or service is going to not explode and crash. You're going to have to reload a server or reboot your app. So with WireMock, you can actually set these up in a little canned way so that you can have automated tests to go ahead and test that for you. So in this case, we're going to simulate a fault. I use the key malformed response chunk, and I'm going to call the fault endpoint. So let's go ahead and stub that up. There it goes, showing it's there. If I call /fault, so let's go ahead and hit it up, and I get back this. Of course, the page isn't working because I have error incomplete chunked encoding. So this is the scenario that would be very hard to replicate normally, but it's got this like kind of pre-built-in thing to WireMock, and I can see that it's ready to get tested. If you want to delay something, because right now everything's like blazing fast, right? But this is not the real world. If you want to go ahead and say, when I call this endpoint, I want it to return back in 2 seconds. I have this other stub here that's going to do a get to delayed, and if it goes there, it's going to have a fixed delay in milliseconds. And I set it for 2000, which is 2 seconds. And it will come back with the body better late than never. So let's give that a shot. I'll verify that that mapping is there. And there it is, delayed. So let's give it a shot. Delayed, 1, 2, boom. So there it is. Like I can set up these delays. And I can set this up per mock, so I can say this one is going to be specifically slow. And I found this very valuable if you're trying to debug something where like you have a loading screen in your app or something. If you go ahead and WireMock and you say, for this one specific endpoint, go ahead and take 15 seconds. Because then I can make sure my loading screen is there. And there's a lot of other cases for this. If you want to test like a timeout or something in your app, you can say, take 30 seconds and my timeout's 15. Let's make sure that gets triggered. Cool. All right. So the next thing we can do is we could actually set a global. So there's ability to set things on specific stubs, but you can also set it globally on the WireMock instance itself. And so instead of hitting admin/mappings like we normally do, you can hit admin/settings. So I'm going to make a post request to this with a delayed distribution of type uniform till 0 to 5 seconds. And as you just read with that, that seems kind of complex. And it kind of is. In this case, it's just 0 to 5,000, but there's all these like logarithmic different like formulas and things that are beyond my brain. But if you have weird scenarios you want to try, check out the documentation on wiremock.org, and there's all sorts of permutations of this. So let's go ahead and check this out. I'll stub it up. And one thing that I still have running is fault. So this should be between 0 and 5 seconds. So let's give it a shot. A little bit of a delay. It's loading. There it is. Do it again. There it was fast. So hopefully you believe me, it was like a little bit longer the first time, shorter the next time, and it'll be random as we go along. So this is still loading, and this is closer to 5 seconds. There it is. So that's really cool that we can do it on a global level. So we figured out how to make all these requests, but one good thing about testing, and you'll see this, at least in my case, I see it in Mockito and Java, you want to make sure if you're doing your set of test case that things were actually called and made. Right? So I have all these mappings, that's fine and dandy, but if my client or my code did not actually call the API, or it did call the API, I want to know that. So let's do some verification, and we can do this over that REST API just like we saw. So what I can do here is I can make a post request to admin/request/count. And I'm going to look for a get request to delayed. So I can kind of do this to a specific endpoint or like a pattern, and it'll give me all the count of the requests that came back. So we know we just called delayed a few times there, or actually once, that was full. But I'll go ahead and make a call, and it comes back with a count. So the count was 1 to delayed. Let's just make sure I'm not lying. Delayed. That's the 2-second delay, or maybe it was a little bit more. There it is. Better late than never. If I make this request again, oops, there we go. Count is 2. So as you can see, that's really powerful, right? You're going to be able to validate that HTTP call was actually made to the server and it got the response. Continuing on, there's a full journal of networking requests that happen. So I showed you there's that reset API, but before that happens, you can actually get a full log of all the requests that you've made. So let's give that a shot. I could go ahead and do this via the command line, but I can also do it via here since it's a get. Let me do it through the incognito. Okay. There we go. So this is all of the requests that we made. So we have the local path. We have the absolute URL that was requested. We also have all the headers that were sent, the response definition that matched, as well as the response. So we said this was matched. There's things like near matches in here. There's misses and so forth. And it actually says here's the stub mapping that was used to intercept this. So there's a lot of powerful data. Not only can you say how many times was this called, you can get a full journal of all the calls that were made. So if you're trying to diagnose something, and this might not be the best tool for that, but if you programmatically want to say make sure that this image request is not done twice because I want to make sure it's caching, you can go ahead and do that with this. Now here, I call this advanced HTTP mocking with WireMock, and this is one of the coolest features that I haven't seen done well on any other mocking tools. And so this is with stateful behaviors. So the scenario I'm going to go talk through is the to-do list item scenario. And so in this case, like you have one endpoint that you deal with, and you guys will probably have this a lot of cases where I'm calling a get to the /items endpoint. And the first time I call, I want to have no items. The next time I call, I want to have 1. And the next time I call, I want to have 2. And so if you think about just stubbing that in general, how do you make it so it returns in that order? WireMock has scenarios to do that for you. So what you can do as part of your mapping, you can say the scenario name is X. In this case, I'll call it a grocery list. So as long as I use that name throughout all of my mappings, it'll know that that's the scenario we're in. And with WireMock, you say the required scenario state to match this request is going to be started. And that's the default for WireMock, so the first one has to be started. And then you say after this has been served, the new scenario state name will be one item, because that's the next thing. So let's go ahead and stub that up. Paste. I'm going to go ahead and just show you it's there. There we go, the grocery list thing. It'll have no items, and now let's make the request. So localhost/items. Oh, I still have that fixed delay thing. I want to get rid of that. So let's see, kill WireMock, start WireMock, restub that, and let's see here. Cool, now we just have that one thing for grocery list. I don't have that global delay, which is kind of annoying. But there you go, you just have an empty response now. So now let's stub up the next 2 in this scenario. Let's stub up the one item, which will be milk. So it's a JSON body with milk. Go ahead and stub that. And then I will do the next one, which is a JSON body of milk and bread. Paste that. Now if I look at my mappings, you'll see in WireMock, if I call items, milk and bread will get returned back this time, milk, and then here it'll have none. So let's try it out. Go ahead and refresh. It's milk, it's bread, 0, 1, 2, 0, 1, 2, yay. So we're in this scenario, and that's great. But what if I don't want to restub all of my mocks, and I just want to run another test case where I want to reset everything? There's a reset API for just scenarios. And so what that looks like is this curl request is next. And so I can call this, and it'll reset the scenarios. As you can see right now, we're kind of in the middle of the scenario. The next item should be 2. But if I go ahead and call this reset API, and then I call this again, it'll start over again. So it started with that first one. So that's a kind of nifty thing in there. See, I'm doing on time. All right, we're almost there. All right, so this is like my opinionated section. What kind of stubbing should I use? And I think I've hinted to this, file-based versus the programmatic approach. Now, file-based has tons of merits. Like the recording that we just saw, we did this so fast. It's completely understandable by looking at those files. If you have a ton of files, it can get a little complex, but if you just think about this versus other solutions, it's like a very easy way to do it. And if you want to share this, you can like zip up those files or mappings, you can put them in GitHub, and then just start WireMock with those in the directory, and you'll have your mock server. So that's really good, but it's not the best for advanced usage, like all these kind of crazy patterns and different like version 1, version 2, and then maintainability in general. Like anytime you have something file-based and it's not generated by code, you're going to have to go and edit each one of those individually and manage it not based on code. So as you've been noticing, I recommend the programmatic stubbing approach. It's great for automated tests. We actually use this for our test suite that we have at Capital One Wallet. You can have very complex mocks and numerous mocks, but it's not the best for getting started, non-developers, if you have somebody that isn't a great developer but needs to test special cases, and just simple use cases themselves. Like all I want to do is just make sure when I hit this one API at 409 comes back. That's fine. You don't need to use programmatic for that, unless it's an automated test. So I've talked about, like, there's a curl REST API. Obviously, you can use that from any language. There's also language-specific libraries. I've only used the Java, but there's one for Ruby, Clojure, PHP, Groovy, Node, and there's probably more. But as you saw, these are not complex responses, so you don't need a library. If you are using Java, there's a JInit rule. So this doesn't work great on Android, but for all you JVM Java developers, you just put a WireMock rule, and then you start it up. And what that will do is programmatically create a server for you and tear it down at the end of your test. So you're creating a fresh WireMock server, you're doing all your stuff and breaking it down. And that's super handy. And then if you're using just Java itself, you can just say, I want to create a new WireMock server on this port and start, and then stop. And it's that easy. So in any Java code you have, you can just go ahead and call that, and your WireMock server is started. You're not having to do it via the command line. I just want to show the difference between syntax, right? So we've been looking at things for the stubbing that looks like a JSON request, like this up top. But if you did this in Java, it looks a little bit more readable down here. It's saying, I want to stub for a GET request with a URL path equal to categories, where we return a response with the status 200 and the body blank. So I feel like that's very readable. It's nice syntax where if we looked at this, it is there, everything, but it's not in that flow that like a human would normally read. So that's the advantage of having a wrapper. WireMock on Android. So this is where my contributions to WireMock have come in. Michael Bailey is a developer at American Express, and he like kind of got WireMock to work in the first place but he did it in their proprietary code base, and nobody else has that. So I worked beginning of last year to get it to work on Android, and worked with Tom Akers on that. Didn't have to do too many changes, thankfully, because he did a lot of work for me. But if you go to the documentation, it'll actually link to my blog post for Android. So to get version 2.0 to work on Android, he had already done awesome stuff like making sure that it was Java 7 compatible, because Android does not support Java 8 yet. We're hopefully going to get there one day. And then also, there's some issues with the HTTP client, because they're using everything from Apache and WireMock. The HTTP client has been deprecated with newer versions of Android, so we have to supply that ourselves. So the only workarounds, and I've got some example projects, you can hit me up if you want to learn more on Android, but you just ignore that you're going to use their HTTP client, you're going to use yours instead, and you don't need like the JSON library because it already is included in Android. This is a really cool website, methods count, and you can put in any Gradle dependency or Maven dependency or anything. You just put in the package and then the things like that. And what comes back here is it says that there's actually 71,000 methods within all of WireMock. So that's huge. And on the Android side, that's like people bite their tongue and say, oh, that's a horrible. You can't do that, because by default, 64,000 is the limit for Android. But as you saw, it's a Swiss Army knife. There's tons of stuff that you can do with it. So like here's all the libraries it's importing. That's why there's a lot of stuff there. But in my case, it's worth it. I have so much power. My mocking is so deterministic. I have great test coverage. If you want to get around it and you just like are starting a brand new project, min SDK 21, you don't have to worry about multi-dexing problems, and you just set multi-dex enabled to true. So I've got sample projects out there, and that's linked from the WireMock documentation. So bonus demo, I have 2 minutes, so this will be really fast. I have already a a emulator running here. And what I'm going to do is show you that I have no mappings right now, because I just started this up. So no mappings running on the current local instance. I'm going to go ahead and then run my app here, which will actually programmatically stub WireMock for this like shopping app. So I've got Nintendo and Sega. If I go back over to my mappings, it's actually communicated from the emulator to this WireMock instance running on my computer. And you can actually run WireMock on the laptop, or on the device itself, but I wanted to show you what it looks like. So it's actually using the WireMock server on this computer. So you can see for the category Sega, it's going to return back a bunch of stuff. If I come down here in general, has my like name as a username, and there's items for Nintendo. Let's click around, Nintendo, sweet, I can add things to my cart. And that's awesome, because I have this scenario set up where I'm using the video games. Now what I wanted to show now is, I'm doing all this programmatically, and I have like mock accounts. So I'm going to go ahead and launch one with produce now. So if I'm a grocery store instead, because this is a dynamic app, I'm working with different data coming back. This is going to then relaunch the application. It's going to restub all of WireMock programmatically and set it up for produce. So I'm going to stay here for a second so we can make sure it does what it's supposed to do. So it is installing the APK. We'll watch this flash up here in about a second. There we go. Now we have fruits and vegetables and seafood. So if I go into WireMock now, it was Sega. I refresh, now I have vegetables and things of that sort. So I can click through here and get all of my beautiful shopping app stuff like that. So in WireMock, I'm programmatically setting all these up. When I call this, do these things. And so I've kind of set it up in a way where it's either a session or a mock account where I'm dealing with that. And I can have all different kinds of scenarios, error scenarios, and this can be done with any language. I'm an Android developer, so I've tried to share some of that knowledge. And thank you. And if you're around town, just here in McLean on August 24th and 25th, I'm wearing an Android Summit shirt, but I work at Capital One and we're organizing it. If you're interested in Android, please come. It supports women who code. So I'm free for questions afterwards because I got to run off here because of timing, but thank you very much.